Welcome to this masterclass on leading change in yourself and others. I'm really delighted to have some of my existing and current clients attending, as well as some new contacts. And much of my work comes from referrals, recommendations, and this is my opportunity to give something back. So I'm very pleased to be offering you this masterclass, and I hope it adds a lot of value for you. Welcome to the new contacts as well, and thank you for joining us. So the focus of today is how to lead change that sticks. What are we going to explore together today? Well, we're going to look at the definitions, if you like, of some key words that we use here: change, transformation, disruption. And then we're going to look at how change happens. How does change actually happen in organizations? And why do we resist it? Then we're going to move on to look at change leadership. What is it? And how can we lead change in a way that makes it sustainable? And then, why do we need to be disruptive? And how can we be disruptive as a leader? So I hope you're all up for that. So according to the World Economic Forum, there are some key skills that are going to be very much in demand by 2020. And these include cognitive flexibility, learning agility, having a growth mindset, and being able to lead change. And because change is a constant in the business world, this acknowledges the need to really develop the ability to lead change in yourself and in others. I did a survey amongst my LinkedIn contacts and asked them which of the things listed on the screen here are most challenging for them, most current in terms of the challenges that they're facing, and how to lead change successfully in yourself and others came out top, hence the topic of this masterclass. So let's stand back a minute and think about these terms that we're all using: change, transformation, growth mindset, disruption. What do they all mean? Well, for me, change is quite a linear thing. It's going step by step from one place that you've been in the past to somewhere else that you want to be in the future. Having a growth mindset is really important because it's the foundation of being able to lead change. And that's seeing yourself as a work in progress and knowing that you're fine as you are, but there's a lot of potential there that you can grow into over time. Transformation, however, is much more radical. It's a state of change that's like shifting from caterpillar to a butterfly, so shifting from one state to another. And the Oxford Dictionary definition of disruption is a disturbance or problems which interrupt an event, activity, or process. So why do organisations need to change? I've been using this quote by Reg Evans for quite a few years now. And what it says is, for a company to survive, it must be learning and adapting faster than the changes occurring in its external environment. So L must be greater than C. And that's accelerating even more in the current disruptive climate in which we're living. So how does change happen? Well, there are a lot of models that we've used in the past. This is one from 1947 by Kurt Lewin that really influenced how we viewed change until quite fairly recently. So the idea was that the organisation is very much a machine. It's very organised and it's something you can control. So you unfreeze the current state, you plug in the change that you want to see, and then you refreeze it. And actually, change doesn't really happen like that. Margaret Wheatley, who's a very famous thinker about change, wrote this quote, and this was her view of that mechanistic view of organisations. If people are machines, seeking to control us makes sense. And if we believe that responsible leaders must have their hands in everything, controlling every decision, person and movement, then we can't hope for anything except what we already have. We can't hope to change. And what we have is a treadmill of frantic efforts that end up destroying our individual and collective reality. And so what she puts forward instead is this two loops model. Because at the end of the day, organizations are living systems. And so we need to understand how living systems change and evolve to understand how our organizations change and evolve. So maybe we should apply the two-loop system to our political system in the UK currently, or maybe not. But if we do that, what we find is that that old paradigm, that old system peaks at the top. It has most influence at the top of that top loop. And then it goes into decline. And as it's in decline, it's in its death throes. And a lot of people cling on to things from the past and even try to take us back to the past, that they have a nostalgic view of the past being better. And usually what happens is some people walk out of that old system, pioneers walk out. At first it's just individuals with beliefs about new ways of doing things. Gradually they connect together and ultimately become a community of practice that nourish and support each other. And eventually that gets enough traction and credibility to become the new potential paradigm, and a bridge is created, if you like, to take people from the old system over to the new, to take those that don't want to die with the old, I should say, over to the new. And so the leadership challenge here is to hospice and honour the old as it dies off, at the same time as nurturing the new and allowing that to emerge. And the frustration I've felt for a while with the UK political system was that nothing new was emerging. But we are starting to see shoots of new things now. The new Change UK party, a lot of the climate and the green activists are doing new things. So I think there is hope that that new paradigm will start to emerge. And you've probably heard often that people say 70% of change fails. And there's a huge cost to that. These are just estimates of what it costs, excluding staff and management time in the UK, because of the amount of change that doesn't actually result in successful implementation. So here it's estimated that £4.2 billion are wasted a year on change in the UK. So we have to ask, well, why does change fail so often? I'll come back to that a few times in this masterclass. I think the first reason is that our change tools are probably outdated and they're not fitting for the world in which we live in. And sometimes because they're used incorrectly. So that old model of unfreeze, change, freeze, that doesn't work again. That doesn't work currently. So I just want to say here, in case any of you have to leave the webinar early, that with my friend Marina Nicholas, who's an expert in digital transformation, we're going to be offering 4 complimentary one-to-one discovery sessions on leading change and disruption. And you can apply using the link here at the bottom of the page. We'll look at your reasons for wanting to take part in this and give 4 free sessions to the people who we think will benefit most from it. So I'll repeat this at the end, and you can apply for these after the masterclass. And we'd love to be working with you and answering all your questions on change and disruption and helping you move forward with those things. So to carry on with the theme of how does change happen? Yes, organizations are living systems. They're made up of people. So it's not organizations that change as a whole entity. It's the people in them that change, one person at a time. And change happens to those individuals as they go through this emotional journey. I'm sure you've seen this change curve before. So the initial reaction to change is shock, denial, anger, and even depression for some people, depending what's involved for them. So they go through that phase of denial and resistance. And only when they get to acceptance, which for some people takes much longer than others, can they start to move on with the curve, with the change, start to experiment with new behaviors and start to commit to the change themselves and take a part in implementing it. So it's important to understand that change is an emotional journey for everybody involved, including you. So why do we resist change? Well, you can see from this McKinsey data, we said that 70% of change fails, and a quarter of those failures are the result of employee resistance. So a lot of that's to do with how our brain operates. Neuroscience can help us to understand why we resist change. So you can see from this chart here that our brains have 2 possible operating modes, if you like. First of all, we've got the survival or threat mode, or the away mode that's sometimes called. And then we've got the growth and reward state, or the toward state. And when we're in that threat and survival state, which change often puts us into because we see it as a threat, We want to focus on that threat and on that danger. We have tunnel vision and narrow focus, and we want to minimize the danger. We become disengaged, which helps us feel even more insecure and uncertain. And we become focused on the problem. We avoid things. We're negative thinking because our dopamine is down. And we contract. We definitely are close to change when we're in that state. So your job as a leader of change is to enable people to access a growth state, a reward state, a state where they're open to change. And in this state, they're much more positive. Their dopamine levels are up. They want to engage, they're interested, they want to find solutions. They've got a much bigger perspective, a global view on things, and they really want to work with the change and see the benefits in it. So the first thing you have to do is to get people out of survival and threat state into this growth reward towards state. So change, as I've said, is seen as a threat. It puts people into survival and it triggers the fight, flight, freeze response. And we all have our habitual pattern in relation to fight, flight, freeze. You might be someone who fights back by verbally challenging and resisting, or you might just want to avoid it and run away, or freeze so that maybe you're not noticed. And there's been so many change initiatives before, maybe this one will go away as well. So as I say, we're in the business world, change is a constant. So we're often in stress response in relation to change. And what happens when we go into stress response is the amygdala, the center, emotional part of our brain, our fear center, takes over. And it thinks, I need energy to fight back, to run away. And I'm going to close down this prefrontal cortex where we do all our good short-term thinking. Our executive function is there. And it takes a lot of energy. So it closes that down. So we can't think straight. We can't rationally evaluate the change. And what the amygdala does, it flushes our brain and our bodies with cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones, which lower our dopamine, make us feel negative, make us feel down into that early part of the emotional change curve. And basically, this state is meant to be short-lived, but because change is so prevalent in business these days, we're often in a constant amygdala hijack, a low-level amygdala hijack. And that reduces our ability to think creatively, to problem solve, and ultimately can compromise our well-being and our health, because that cortisol and adrenaline, our cells see that as toxic, and our cells all shut down. So they become silos, we become a silo, we close ourselves down. And whilst the cells are closed down, they're not taking in the good nutrients that they need to really thrive, which ultimately, over the longer term, can adversely affect our immune system. So the other thing about change in the brain is it feels uncomfortable. And I'd just like to demonstrate that now by doing a little exercise here. So if you just let your arms hang by your side and then cross your arms in the normal way that you do, it feels very normal, very easy, very comfortable. Now let your arms hang down by your side again and cross your arms so the opposite arm is on the top. You have to think about it. It's quite awkward and it feels quite uncomfortable in your brain. And that's how change feels to your brain. Changing behavior, doing something different that you've not done before requires you to start to create a new neural pathway. And at first that's really clunky, awkward, and uncomfortable. And your brain doesn't like discomfort, and so it resists change. So that starts to help to explain why we resist change and contribute to many of those change programs failing. So let's think about resistance and what it is really. At the end of the day, people don't change unless they're ready to change. And to be ready to change, they have to have their own reason, their own why to change. So that involves helping them get their own insights. And it's understanding that change takes them on that emotional journey. They're not being negative. They're scared. They're in survival. So when you can stop being frustrated with them and judging them about that and feel a bit of compassion for where they are on that emotional journey, then you can lead them through change. So let's talk now about change leadership. What is it? I think many people confuse change management and change leadership, and that's another reason why change often fails. Change management is the system and the process that you go through to make change happen. And it's really vital. It's an important foundation, but it's not change leadership. Change leadership is leading people on that emotional journey through the change. And that starts with you. You have to lead yourself through the change first before you can lead anybody else, because you have two hats on as a leader of change. The chances are that the change will have an impact on you as an employee. So first of all, you have to lead yourself through the change. And you then have to be able to put your other hat on. And regardless of the impact of the change on you, you have to be able to lead others through that change. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. So I was working with a group of leaders who are implementing a restructure. Everybody seems to be implementing restructures these days. And they had to get themselves to the point of acceptance, knowing that some of them would actually lose their jobs or have significant change to their roles. And they wouldn't be able to communicate effectively to others if they didn't get to a place of acceptance themselves. And some of the people they'd worked with for a very long time, they'd taken them on years ago, seen them grow and develop. It was very difficult for them to have these difficult conversations and to make some of these people redundant. And the main leader who was in charge of that process was soldiering on through the process and eventually hit a bit of a brick wall. So I was called in to coach him. He was close to breaking down with the impact of this. And as I started to coach him, he realized that the organization had not put in place the support needed for the people who had to lead others through this difficult change and transition. So he realized he really needed to look after himself and his own journey through the change first before he was capable of effectively leading change in others. So I did a little video before this masterclass that I sent out to many of you, and it was called Encourage the Change You Want to See, which is a bit of a play on the Gandhi quote, which is be the change you want to see. And as leaders of change in organizations, it's really important to understand that organizational transformation begins with personal transformation of the leaders, and that means you. As we've said, organizations don't transform, people do, and you need to be a part of that transformation. And the reason I made the video that says encourage the change you want to see, in creating and encouraging new behaviors, encouragement is 13 times more effective than negative or constructive feedback. The brain sees it as a reward. It creates that dopamine in the brain that makes you feel positive and feel good. And the brain wants to do that behavior more and more, which means the neural pathway gets embedded and the habit becomes hardwired. So encouragement is really key if you want to help people and enable change in people. The other reason that transformation starts with you, the leaders of change, is that 70% of what happens in organizations come from imitating the leaders. We all have mirror neurons and we imitate others, especially influential others. So your emotions in relation to the change influence others and their view on that change. I was working with an innovation team who again were leading a big restructure. And I was supporting the leadership team and helping them to work out how they wanted to collectively lead this change. The person who was the R&D director, I sensed was really feeling quite negative himself about the change process. And sometimes I use dowsing rods to assess people's energy field and where their emotions are in relation to something. So I used my dowsing rods, and he realized how closed he was to the idea of this change and what a negative vibe he was putting out about it that everybody else would be picking up. And so I got him to really think about the end result of this change. Imagine it being as successful as it possibly could, having a really positive impact for the people involved and for the whole organization. And when he did that, his energy field was 10 times larger and he was putting out a much more positive vibe. So he realized that he massively had to shift his thinking and to change his view of this whole process that he was leading and make sure that he was in a place where he could put out positive vibe about that change. So to positively influence others and put them into that open toward state. So this is just an example of how your emotions affect others. These two halves of the apple were two halves that I cut up in my kitchen, put into 2 jars with the lids on and put at 2 opposite ends of my kitchen. And every day I would give one of them positive encouragement, acceptance, really positive emotions. And the other one I would be negative towards, criticism, judgment, really saying sort of things that I hate to say, actually. I found it very difficult, but really giving the negative vibe to that half of the apple. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, this is what happened. The one that had been receiving negative emotions was all rotten and withered. And that's what you do to yourself and the people around you if you have negative emotions and negative feelings about the change that you're leading. So you close them down and you make them feel really negative. So I want to share with you 3 tools for leading change that sticks. The first one is a model, if you like, called SCARF, developed by David Rock, who wrote Your Brain at Work. And this is the SCARF model. So there are 5 social domains of the brain: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And these are 5 social domains, if you like, of the brain. But if they're not met, to our brain, it's just as important to our survival as, say, not having any food to eat or having any shelter. So the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy, these social domains of the brain is just as critical in our brains, for our brains, as those 2 lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy. And ultimately, if they're not fulfilled, can adversely affect our health. So SCARF can be used to take people out of that away state and shift them into a toward or reward state. So how do you do that? Well, SCARF works in that we all have a different hierarchy of the SCARF elements. We'll have one that's at the top and one that's at the bottom, and the middle 3 are more or less interchangeable. And those 5 SCARF elements are interconnected. So let's say you're leading a change program that affects someone's certainty. You can offset that by ensuring that they have relatedness, that they have an opportunity to discuss the change with other people, and that you lead the change in a very fair way. So you can offset one element of SCARF that's being threatened by a change initiative with 1 or 2 of the others. And in times of huge change, you might need to use all of the SCARF elements. So think about a change that you're implementing or you've implemented recently, and think about someone affected by it. It might even be yourself. And then think about those SCARF elements: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And think which one is going to be adversely, which ones are going to be adversely affected by this change. And then identify which other elements you could use to compensate for that, and how you could use it. How could you make it a fairer process? How could you give them opportunity to discuss with others? How could you give them more autonomy in relation to the change? The second tool to help make change stick is to use a coaching style. Because I said earlier that for people to want to change, they have to have a reason, they have to have their own why. So you can use a coaching style to help them get their own insights and to initiate what's called self-directed neuroplasticity. In other words, to initiate a rewiring of their brain, a creating of new neural pathways that install new behaviors and make them a habit. And when you're coaching, again, this is David Rock, you can see on a person's face when they're getting that insight and that aha moment. So when they're looking up, when their eyes are looking upwards, they're looking for new insights, for new thoughts, for new ideas. And you need to keep quiet then. You don't need to interrupt them, because your brain needs quiet when it's looking for that new information and new insights. And then when they get the insight and the aha moment, their pupils will dilate. You'll be able to see on their face that they've had the aha moment. And when they have that aha moment, they get a burst of energy that's fairly short-lived. But if you can tap into that energy to get them to initiate the change, then you'll get them started in changing the behavior in the way that you want to see them. And they'll feel more motivated to do so. So a coaching style is very important when you're leading change. And the third tool is to use storytelling or narrative intelligence. This helps to engage with hearts and minds. I've said change is an emotional journey, and storytelling helps to engage people emotionally and helps them to see their part in the change story, if you like. And as this quote says, humans are not ideally set up to understand logic. They're ideally set up to understand stories. Stories are brain friendly. Our brain likes to recognize patterns. It likes to predict what's going to happen next. And we're familiar with stories. We're brought up with them as children. We know they're going to have a structure, and we can relax knowing that the story is going to unfold. And we also knew that chances are there'll be something new and different, because much as our brain likes patterns, it also likes a bit of novelty. It likes to be curious about things. So storytelling puts people into a relaxed and curious state, which is a great combination. And it increases your ability to influence and persuade them, and for them to be motivated and engaged in the change. And as human beings, we think in stories, we dream in stories, we even gossip in stories. So it's not surprising that storytelling is an effective tool for transformation and change. So how does it help to lead change? It helps you to sound human. It helps you to express your emotional journey through the change and connect with people at that emotional level. It helps contextualize the change, helps people to understand complex issues in an accessible way. It helps people to share their contribution to the change process and the change story. And it helps them to understand, what's it going to look like? Why are we going there? Where are we now? What's it going to look like when we get there? Helps them to make sense of the change. And it helps them to acknowledge their emotional journey through the change as well. So it works on so many levels that it's a really, really effective tool for leading change. So, on to disruption. Why do we need to be disruptive? I said earlier, there's this quote, be disruptive or be disrupted, I should say. And it's about managing two different sides of the equation, if you like. The long term, the short term, the status quo and the change. So great companies are good at executing and making the most of the opportunities of today, at the same time as disrupting their way of operating to create more opportunities for the future. And very often they are disrupting themselves as opposed to waiting to be disrupted. Great leaders also maintain the balance between achieving results today and innovating to seize the opportunities that the future holds for them. So if you want to avoid disruption or even lead it, you need to accelerate the way you organize change internally, so you keep pace, as Red Revan said, with the pace of change outside your organization. And often this feels paradoxical. So as a leader, you need to be very agile. And being an agile leader means that on the one hand, you're an enabler. You have learning agility, you learn new things, you grow, you enable that in others, you create a learning environment. You give them some sort of clarity of direction. Yes, this is where we're heading, and it might change as things change around us, but we do have some clarity of direction of where we're going. And you connect with them on an emotional level. You build relationships based on trust. You have empathy for their situation. You understand where they are. You create a trust-based environment where they're comfortable to experiment and try new things. And you empower them, you trust them to do that. And you collaborate, you encourage collaboration and everybody working together and supporting each other. At the same time as disrupting the status quo, being thoughtfully decisive. And by that we mean slowing things down, standing back, reflecting yourself, reflecting with others, assessing what the situation is and what's required, and then being quick to make a decision and move forward on that decision. Being digitally literate, so even if you're not a digital native, engaging with someone who is, maybe in a reverse mentoring relationship. Always challenging the status quo and questioning it, and thinking and enabling people to think of new ways of doing things. And having the customer at the heart of everything, so having all of the data, information and insights that allow you to be close to those customers' trends, really connecting with customers and understanding them and putting that at the heart of the organization. And as happens with any sort of change, when leading disruption, it all starts with senior leaders. If the senior leaders aren't brought into it, if they don't understand the digital transformation that they want to bring about, or the agile transformation in the culture, then that change, that disruption won't stick, because the leaders set the culture and climate for the organization. Senior leaders need to role model agility if you want to create an agile culture. They need to create that learning culture where they focus on learning and getting better every day themselves and encouraging that in others. And feedback is a key part of that, being really open to feedback, seeking feedback, and giving it in a positive way to others. As we said, encouragement is really important in enabling change. Creating that trust-based environment where people feel safe to learn, to fail, and learn fast, to make mistakes. So it's about thinking slow, reflecting, and then acting decisively and quickly, challenging the status quo, and always trying to simplify the complex environment, the complex world in which we operate. So that's what I was going to say about disruption today. We've got time for questions. If anyone has any, please put them in the chat box. But if you need to rush off, then no worries about that. But don't forget that we are offering these 4 complimentary discovery sessions with Marina Nicholas and myself, where you can have a one-to-one, a 45-minute one-to-one with us, and bring any of your questions about change and disruption, and we'll happily support you with that in this complimentary session. It's been a pleasure sharing this masterclass with you, and I really look forward to hearing your change, transformation, and disruption stories. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending where you are in the world.